Welcome to College Football Mornings, brought to you by CampusToCanton.com. It is Tuesday. That means we are talking some waiver wire here. And to help with that, as always, I am Austin.
And this is Colin.
We've finally got some football on the books here, Colin, so we don't have to get quite as theoretical with our waiver advice as we had to last week. We've got some guys that have actually touched a football field within recent memory. And we're going to kind of try to point you in some directions here. We do want to issue a caveat on this episode, similar to last week, but a little bit different. So I know a lot of Campus to Canton leagues have limited waivers. And I think unless your team is just desperate for something, there's probably only one name, maybe two today that I would recommend you actually go and look at. But if you have unlimited waivers, I think a lot of these names get a little more interesting. You can certainly at least pick them up to try to kind of accrue some of that early season value. But we just want to give you a heads up on that we're giving some names here. And these are some guys that look good. But again, if you have 4 waivers a season or 2 waivers or something like that, then maybe you hold off and let somebody else potentially make a mistake here on a couple of these guys.
Yeah, I think it's important, especially in leagues where your waiver pickups are limited. I think it's important to exercise caution early in the season. I mean, you don't want to miss out on an obvious guy who breaks out, but you also don't want to fall victim like I did last year, where I picked up Mekhi Bernard, the running back for Utah, after his big game week 1. And then he was essentially worthless for the rest of the year, and Tavion Thomas blew up. So, you do have to exercise some caution, and if your pickups are limited, and allow a little bit bigger of a sample size, because there's not always the best competition that they're facing in week 1. They still haven't really shaken out the way they want the distributions. You start to get an idea, but you just gotta bear with it.
Yeah. I think that's very well said, Colin. So without further ado, let's run through the list here. We have 3 names that we think are potential ads for you this week. First up, we're going to start with Dawood Davis. He's a little higher rostered than maybe we'll usually talk about on this show. The Fantrax roster numbers aren't always super helpful for Campus to Canton leagues because we tend to play a deeper format than a lot of people that are using Fantrax for redraft or best ball or other similar formats for fantasy. So we usually try to shoot for like 10%, maybe something a little lower than that when we're giving advice, just to try to make sure that a lot of these players are actually available. Dawood Davis is the first name here. He's actually rostered 25% of leagues, but he's available in a lot of my leagues, like fewer than half, but more than I would have guessed. So he's definitely a big name here to consider, wide receiver at Western Kentucky. He led Western Kentucky in receiving this week, guys. 6 catches, 124 yards, and a touchdown there in their win over Austin Peay. Most targets on the team, I believe most routes run, was very, very dynamic. We had heard all offseason probably going to be the wide receiver 2 there behind Malachi Corley, who himself had a very nice game as well. 3 touchdown catches for him, but he is almost certainly roster on one of your team. Dawood Davis could put up very comparable production. So I think he is a guy that if you have FOB and some open waivers this week, I'm spending a decent piece of it on him.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, you touched on Dawood Davis is available in more leagues than you would expect, just because if anybody drafted earlier in the offseason, we're talking like May and June, it was still kind of up in the air as to who would be the number 2 there. He's kind of leaning towards Dawood Davis, but the Western Michigan transfer Jalen Hall was also getting a little bit of buzz at that point as well. So yeah, I completely agree. If Davis is available, this is somebody that you pick up in week 1, no matter how many pickups you have.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what percentage of your FOB I would recommend, but it would definitely be more than 25%. I would say a third would be appropriate. And if you're really, really hurting at wide receiver, I would say you could happily go a little more than that. I probably wouldn't go over 55%, just because it's one game. I wrote a little bit about it in the article that released today, our key takeaways. But Western Kentucky run pass split was virtually even. They ran the ball 32 times this week, guys. They ran the ball more than 30 times once all last year. So very interesting. New offensive coordinator. Maybe the play calling is slightly different. I think it's unfair to expect quite the level of production some of those wide receivers had. But yeah, Davis certainly a candidate to be a flex guy most weeks, and maybe even better than that. Obviously 6 for 124 and 1. Quite a nice stat line there.
Yeah, absolutely. The next guy we're going to talk about here, Ricky White, wide receiver for UNLV. He's a little bit less owned than David Davis, about 8% on Fantrax there. The former Michigan State transfer had a big game this game, and UNLV in general had a huge game, which we'll talk a little bit about later on. But Ricky White, 8 catches, 182 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Like I said, this guy came from Michigan State, so he has that P5 background. You don't always like to see them go P5 to G5, but in terms of fantasy production, we don't really care. Ricky White's a talented wide receiver. This is a stat line that I think is probably pretty close to his ceiling. I don't know how good UNLV of a team, UNLV actually is.
8, 182 and 2 is a ceiling. That's okay. I think that's fair.
That's probably a ceiling play for him. I don't know how many weeks he'll get back up to this, but especially in a league where you have unlimited waiver pickups, this is a guy that I would be picking up this week.
Yeah, I mean, 38 fantasy points if you're talking a PPR league. He's going to be the guy there. Him and Kyle Williams. But Williams himself has never been that much of a mega producer. His underlying stats look good because they haven't passed the ball a ton. But I would venture to say pretty comfortably that Ricky White is the better option there of the two. And maybe this offense is a little better than it was the past couple of years. So yeah, I think that's I like him a lot moving forward here. What percentage would you be willing to spend on a Ricky White, Colin?
Like I said, I'm probably only picking him up in leagues where I have unlimited waiver pickups. If I have limited waiver pickups, I'm probably not burning it on Ricky White or anybody on UNLV. But assuming it's unlimited, I would probably be willing to spend, maybe like 10 to 15% on him. Nothing crazy.
I think 20 is the highest I would go. So we're pretty close there on that one. Yeah. Wide receiver heavy week here, guys. Tyron Smith, our third and final name that we think it can go into the ad category. For those not familiar with Tyron Smith, 5'7", 170. He's a redshirt sophomore at UTEP. And I think a lot of people figured he would probably be the leading producing receiver there at UTEP or in the mix to do that. But I think it's possible that we underestimated exactly how pass heavy this offense will be. UTEP is really bad, guys. They got pretty blown out by North Texas this weekend. It was never really a game after the first quarter. Picks down. Unfortunately, they're not going to be the hot name this year for us. Lost by 3 scores. But that means they're going to be passing the ball a lot, guys. They passed the ball, I believe, 48 times this week. Tyron Smith counted for 7 catches, and he had 16 targets as well. He was the most targeted guy, both from a raw target number and target percentage of any player across the FBS this weekend. So that's kind of a big deal. 7 catches, 127 yards, a touchdown. Nice production. Wasn't super efficient on his targets, but hey, if they're going to throw the ball almost 50 times a game, he doesn't necessarily have to be. And again, I just think UTEP is a bad team moving forward. I think you're going to see very similar game script, a very pass-heavy offense, and his quarterback's decent. Gavin Hardison is not a bad quarterback by any stretch. He can get the ball to his receivers. So Tyron Smith, a guy, not more than 5 to 10%, guys. And if I have limited waivers, I'm not touching him this week. I'm letting him sit there for another week or two. And if he continues to do this, then I'm picking him up. Very, very solid chance that he was a kind of a 1-week wonder. But I like the underlying kind of numbers that he put up this week. And so if I have unlimited, I'm willing to take a small chance here on Tyron Smith.
Yeah, same. In unlimited leagues, yeah, sure, pick him up, but not touching him in limited waiver leagues. That's really going to do it for the guys that we're recommending adding this week. We do have some other guys' names for you here that, throw them on your watch list. Leading that list is Nathan Carter, running back out of UConn. He absolutely exploded here in week 1. 20 carries for 190 yards, 1 catch for 10 yards. So 200 all-purpose yards there. Doesn't get in the end zone, but you have to figure with that kind of usage, he's going to get in the end zone at times here. And I think with losing Taquan Roberson and having to put in Zion Turner, the true freshman at quarterback, we're probably going to see UConn shift a little bit more run heavy than even they were originally intending to. So I think this is, like I said, mixing a touchdown, probably a little less on the yards, but fantasy points wise, this is something that I think will be within Nathan Carter's range of outcomes, probably the top end, but we could see some other performances like that this year. Now, UConn also not a very good team, so it's really, really going to be schedule dependent as far as when you would want to actually play him. So I'm not picking him up yet at this point. He's only 6% owned, but definitely a watch list guy.
Yeah, if I'm in just a crazy deep league, I'm thinking about it, and maybe some sort of CFF type setup, but nothing for C2C for sure. And it is just notable, Colin, you mentioned that they did lose Roberson, their starting quarterback. They also lost, before the season started, Ross, their leading receiver. They lost their second leading receiver, Keelan Marion. So they're down like everything passing offense-wise. They're really going to lean on the run there, I think, for Carter. Heading back to UNLV here, guys, Doug Brumfield. 1% roster on Fantrax, and even that seems sort of generous based on what we'd seen out of him in the past. He completed less than 50% of his passes on not a ton of volume, but has been very, very poor. But he looked decent this week, albeit against, again, Idaho State. 21 for 25, 356 yards, 4 touchdowns. Look, I cannot possibly advocate picking this guy up in any real sort of context. It just things have to be going really poorly for you to do that here early in the season. But watch list, monitor. UNLV has a couple tough games in their schedule, but they also have a lot of very, very weak teams on their schedule. And if this is how this offense can perform, kind of a front runner type offense, where when things are going really good, they're going really good, then Brumfield pairing him with White there, I think can definitely be a decent duo, and he can run a little bit as well. So I think just something to monitor there. Again, watch list, don't add, but Doug Brumfield, quarterback from UNLV, a name to look out for.
Yeah, the next guy we have on the list here, Calvin Tyler Jr., running back for Utah State, 9% owned, so a little bit higher ownership there. But I mean, you talked about it a little bit earlier when we were talking about Western Kentucky and that run pass split. This was also a very surprising run pass split for me at Utah State against UConn. They ran, Calvin Turner had 33 carries for 161 yards, 2 catches for another 33 yards. This team was much more pass heavy last year. They only threw the ball 29 times this year, so more run heavy than pass heavy, which was surprising. So I think that's part of the reason why we saw Calvin Tyler have the game that he had. Don't know if that's something that's going to be necessarily sustainable all year long, which is more why he's still in the watch list category than the ad category for me. But if you're going to add anybody from this watch list group here, him and Carter are 1 and 2, and they're probably pretty close for me, because this was anytime somebody has 161 yards, almost 200 yards from scrimmage, that's a huge day.
Yeah, surprising how much volume he got there. We'll see what he does moving forward. Mike Wright, quarterback from Vanderbilt here, 2% rostered on Fantrax. Look, he doesn't get to play Hawaii every week. He's an SEC guy. The schedule is not kind, especially down the back stretch. So we're putting him here in watch list. And would it shock me if this is the best game that he has by a lot for fantasy purposes this year? No, it would not. But 13 for 21 through the air, 146 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then he had another 163 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. This guy, he's not a very good quarterback, but he is very athletic and he's a very good runner. I could see him continuing to have a decent floor because of some of his rushing capabilities. We'll see what Vanderbilt can do. I know they're kind of building something there. They had like the 30th something recruiting class in the country or around there. They're also going up against teams that pretty much all compile the top 15 of recruiting rankings. So unfortunate for them, unfortunate for Mike Wright. Not a guy that I would want to necessarily think about adding to a roster today. And if I did, I certainly wouldn't be thinking about starting him moving forward. But 2% on Fantrax, I think, is a guy you just hit that little star icon. You sit there. If he does it a couple more weeks, then maybe we're willing to take another look.
Yeah, he's another guy that I would be looking to pick up right now. But like you said, a watch list, certainly due to his dual threat ability there. Like I said, he's not going to be playing Hawaii every week. So 163 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. Probably the best performance we're going to see out of him all year. I'm just disappointed he didn't hit the passing yards prop. Wasn't even really close at 200.5, which was when I had recommended playing it, and I thought he would. But the line opened at, I believe, 150.5, and he didn't even hit that. Right. So that was kind of kind of surprising there.
Should have played fantasy points, Colin. Should have played the fantasy points line.
That one worked out for me with Trey Palmer for Nebraska. But speaking of Nebraska, I was speaking of of Nebraska. That was my transition. You just completely ruined it. Running back Anthony Grant for Nebraska there. Big game against Northwestern there. 19 carries, 101 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Really handled the bulk of the work on the ground, which, we had heard a steady drumbeat from him all off season, that he was looking pretty good, that he was looking likely to lead that committee. I wasn't ready to give Gabe Ervin up for dead yet, because he had some buzz too there, but really seeming like this is going to be Anthony Grant's show based on week 1. 9% owned, so he's probably available in your leagues. I'm just watch listing him at this point because I don't know how effective this run game is going to be on a regular basis. It's not going to be the same that it was with Adrian Martinez under center. Casey Thompson, if he can't get that passing game going, like he struggled with those 2 interceptions on this one. Anthony Grant, this may be one of the better performances we see out of him this year too. So I'm not ready to buy in yet. Just a watch list for now.
You forgot the best part of this story, Colin, as to why he probably got so many snaps and so many touches on offense. Ramir Johnson is supposed to be his biggest competition for touches. Want to use him kind of like they used Wan'Dale Robinson apparently when he was at Nebraska, as kind of a running back wide receiver hybrid type guy. Johnson really didn't play this week because he got in a fight at a casino the night before the game. So unless he's going to do that every week, which I honestly don't know what there is to do around Nebraska's campus. Maybe there is a casino down the street. That's where all the kids go. I don't really know. I'm assuming probably not. So if he's not doing that every week, then maybe Anthony Grant isn't quite getting this many touches. But I agree, Colin. 9%, definitely a guy to put on the watch list there. And if he does continue to get those touches, then you might have a pretty valuable guy there as the season moves on. All right, guys, that's going to do it here for us this morning. As always, hit that like and subscribe button. Follow everything we do over at campustocanton.com. We will see you next week. Until then, I am Austin.
And this is Colin.
And over and out.